Captain Sarah Mitchell adjusted her flight helmet as she walked across the tarmac of Elmendorf Air Force Base in Alaska. The morning sun cast long shadows across the runway, and the crisp mountain air filled her lungs. At 28 years old, she had already earned her place among the elite pilots flying the F-22 Raptor, one of the most advanced fighter jets in the world. Sarah had always dreamed of flying since she was a little girl, watching planes soar overhead in her small hometown of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Her father, a mechanic at the local airport, would take her to work on weekends where she would spend hours watching aircraft take off and land. By age 10, she knew every type of plane by sight and sound. Her mother, a high school math teacher, encouraged her daughter's ambitious dreams even when others doubted a girl could become a fighter pilot. The path to becoming an F-22 pilot had been challenging. Sarah graduated at the top of her class from the Air Force Academy, excelled in flight training, and proved herself in countless missions overseas. She had flown combat missions in the Middle East and participated in training exercises across Europe. Her fellow pilots respected her skills and quick thinking under pressure. That Tuesday morning started like any other day at the base. Sarah was scheduled for a routine training flight with her squadron. The weather was perfect for flying, with clear skies and minimal wind. She had completed her pre-flight checklist and was reviewing flight plans when the base alarm suddenly pierced the morning. Quiet. The loudspeaker crackled to life with an urgent message that would change everything. All personnel to battle stations. Incoming hostile aircraft detected. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. The base erupted into controlled chaos as military personnel rushed to their assigned positions. Sarah's heart raced as she ran toward the control tower to receive orders. Intelligence reports were flooding in about a large formation of enemy aircraft approaching from the northwest. Radar operators counted at least 40 hostile jets moving fast toward their position. The enemy had somehow managed to penetrate deep into American airspace without detection until now. In the command center, General Robert Hayes was coordinating the defense. The seasoned commander had seen action in multiple conflicts over his 30-year career, but this situation was unprecedented. Enemy forces had never launched such a bold attack on American soil in modern times. The general's weathered face showed concern as he studied the radar displays showing the approaching threat. How did they get this close without being detected? General Hayes demanded from his intelligence officers. The response was troubling. The enemy aircraft were using advanced stealth technology and flying at extremely low altitudes to avoid radar detection. They had launched from what appeared to be aircraft carriers positioned far out in the Pacific Ocean. Sarah arrived at the command center just as the general was briefing the available pilots. Most of the squadron was away on training exercises at other bases, leaving only a handful of aircraft and pilots available to defend against the massive incoming attack. The odds were heavily stacked against them, but retreat was not an option. Too many civilian lives were at stake in the surrounding communities. Mitchell, you're our most experienced pilot on base right now, General Hayes said, turning to Sarah. We need every available aircraft in the air immediately. The enemy formation will reach us in less than 20 minutes. Sarah nodded grimly, understanding the gravity of the situation. She had trained for scenarios like this, but never imagined facing such overwhelming odds in a real combat situation. As Sarah rushed back to her F-22, she could see the fear and determination in the eyes of the ground crew preparing her aircraft for combat. These were people she had worked with for years, and now their lives depended on her ability to stop or slow down the incoming attack. The weight of responsibility felt heavy on her shoulders, but she pushed aside any doubt and focused on the mission ahead. The F-22 Raptor was a marvel of military engineering, capable of flying at twice the speed of sound and equipped with advanced weapon systems. Sarah knew her aircraft inside and out, having flown over 500 hours in training and combat missions. The plane was like an extension of herself, responding to her slightest touch on the controls. As she strapped into the cockpit, Sarah took a deep breath and ran through her mental checklist one final time. The enemy was approaching fast, and soon she would be facing the fight of her life against overwhelming odds. But she was ready to defend her base, her country, and the innocent people who were counting on her to stand between them and danger. Sarah's hands moved quickly over the F-22's control panel as she powered up the aircraft systems. The twin engines roared to life behind her, their familiar vibration giving her comfort in the tense moments before takeoff. Through her headset, she could hear radio chatter from the control tower as other pilots prepared for what could be their final mission. Raptor 1, this is Tower. You are cleared for immediate takeoff. Enemy formation now 18 minutes out, came the voice of Captain Rodriguez, the air traffic controller. His usually calm voice carried an edge of urgency that Sarah had never heard before. She knew Rodriguez had a wife and 2 young children living in the town just outside the base gates. The runway stretched ahead of her, longer than a football field but seeming too short given the circumstances. Sarah pushed the throttles forward and felt the incredible power of the F-22 push her back into her seat. Within seconds, she was climbing rapidly into the clear Alaska sky, the base shrinking below her as she gained altitude. Tower, Raptor 1 is airborne and climbing, Sarah reported through her radio. Behind her, she could see 2 other F-22s taking off in rapid succession. Major Thompson and Lieutenant Johnson were experienced pilots, but they had never faced anything like this either. 3 aircraft against 40 seemed like an impossible mission, but they had trained their entire careers for moments like this. As Sarah reached cruising altitude, she activated her aircraft's advanced radar and weapon systems. The F-22's technology was decades ahead of most other fighter jets, but numbers still mattered in aerial combat. Her radar screen began displaying information about the approaching enemy formation, and what she saw made her heart sink. The enemy aircraft were flying in tight formation, suggesting highly trained pilots and coordinated attack plans. Intelligence reports indicated they were carrying air-to-ground missiles capable of devastating the base and nearby civilian areas. If even a few enemy aircraft broke through their small defensive line, the results would be catastrophic for thousands of innocent people. Raptor 1, this is command. Latest intelligence shows enemy aircraft are carrying enough firepower to level the entire base and surrounding communities. General Hayes's voice crackled through her headset. Your mission is to disrupt their formation and eliminate as many threats as possible before they reach target range. Sarah acknowledged the orders while running calculations in her head. The F-22 carried 8 air-to-air missiles, and she was an excellent shot with a success rate of over 90% in training exercises. But even if she and her wingmen performed perfectly, they could only engage 24 enemy aircraft at most before running out of missiles. That would still leave 16 enemy jets free to attack the base. The landscape below her was breathtaking under normal circumstances. Snow-capped mountains stretched to the horizon, their peaks glistening in the morning sun. Dense forests covered the valleys between the mountains, and she could see the ribbon of highway that connected the base to the outside world. But today, all of this beauty felt fragile and vulnerable. Raptor 2 and 3 form up on my wing, Sarah commanded as her 2 fellow pilots joined her in formation. Major Thompson, flying Raptor 2, was a veteran of multiple combat deployments with over 15 years of experience. Lieutenant Johnson in Raptor 3 was newer, but had proven himself to be a skilled pilot with lightning-fast reflexes. The 3 F-22s flew north toward the incoming threat, their sleek profiles cutting through the thin air at high altitude. Sarah could feel the familiar calm that came over her before combat, a mental state she had cultivated through years of training and experience. Her breathing slowed, her focus sharpened, and all distractions faded away. Contact bearing 340, range 60 miles and closing, Lieutenant Johnson reported as the enemy formation appeared on their radar screens. The hostile aircraft were flying low and fast, using the mountainous terrain to mask their approach until the last possible moment. Sarah could see they were well-trained and using sophisticated tactics. As the distance closed between the 2 formations, Sarah began formulating her attack plan. The enemy aircraft seemed to be flying in 3 groups of roughly 13 aircraft each, plus a command group of 4 jets flying slightly behind the main formation. If she could disrupt the command group first, it might throw the entire attack into chaos. Raptors 2 and 3 will engage the trailing command group first, Sarah transmitted to her wingmen. Take out their leadership and coordination, then work on the main formation. Stay tight and watch your 6. Both pilots acknowledged her orders with crisp radio calls. The enemy formation was now less than 10 minutes away from the base, and Sarah knew they had to act fast. In her mind, she could picture the families living in the communities around the base, going about their morning routines without knowing that death was approaching from the sky. Children were probably getting ready for school, parents heading to work, elderly couples enjoying their morning coffee. All of those innocent lives now depended on 3 pilots and their advanced aircraft to stand against overwhelming odds. Sarah gripped her flight controls tighter and prepared to dive into what would become one of the most challenging aerial battles in military history. The distance between the 2 formations closed rapidly as Sarah and her wingmen approached the enemy aircraft at combined speeds exceeding 1,500 miles per hour. Her radar display showed the hostile jets were now only 30 miles away, well within range of their most advanced missiles. Sarah's finger hovered over the weapon release button as she prepared to engage. Enemy aircraft, this is United States Air Force. You have violated American airspace. Turn around immediately or you will be fired upon. Sarah transmitted on the international emergency frequency. She wasn't expecting a response, but military protocol required her to give the warning. The enemy aircraft maintained their course and speed, showing no sign of backing down from their mission. Raptor 1. I'm getting missile lock warnings, Major Thompson reported from Raptor 2. The enemy aircraft had detected their presence and were beginning to target the American fighters with their own weapon systems. Sarah could see on her display that multiple enemy jets were turning toward them, abandoning their original attack formation to engage the 3 F-22s. This was exactly what Sarah had hoped for. Every enemy aircraft that turned to fight them was one less jet heading toward the base and civilian targets. She had succeeded in drawing their attention, but now came the deadly part of her plan. 3 against 40 was still terrible odds, but at least they had the advantage of flying superior aircraft with better technology. Fox 3, Sarah called out as she launched her first 2 missiles at the enemy command group. The AIM-120 missiles streaked away from her aircraft, their rocket motors leaving thin white trails in the clear sky. Her targeting system had locked onto 2 of the command aircraft, and her missiles were tracking perfectly toward their targets. Seconds later, the sky erupted in explosions as Sarah's missiles found their marks. 2 enemy aircraft disappeared in balls of orange flame and black smoke, their wreckage tumbling toward the mountains below. The enemy formation immediately began to break apart as the remaining command aircraft took evasive action. Good shooting, Raptor 1. Lieutenant Johnson called out as he launched his own missiles at the scattered enemy formation. Major Thompson was engaging another group of hostile aircraft, his missiles racing toward their targets through the chaotic aerial battlefield. The sky was now filled with streaking missiles, aircraft maneuvering at extreme speeds, and the smoke trails of damaged jets. Sarah pulled her F-22 into a sharp climbing turn to avoid incoming missiles from enemy aircraft. Her flight suit pressed against her body as the tremendous G-forces tried to push her consciousness away. But years of training had prepared her for this. She maintained awareness of her aircraft's position and the locations of friend and foe in the swirling aerial battle. Splash 2 more, Major Thompson reported as his missiles destroyed 2 additional enemy aircraft. But Sarah could see on her radar that more hostile jets were closing in on their position. The enemy pilots were skilled and aggressive, willing to take significant risks to complete their mission. Several enemy aircraft had broken through the defensive line and were continuing toward the base. The F-22's advanced computer systems were working overtime to track all the aerial targets and threats around them. Warning tones and alerts filled Sarah's headset as her aircraft's defensive systems detected multiple missile launches directed at her position. She threw her jet into a series of violent maneuvers to escape the incoming weapons. Raptor 3 is hit. Lieutenant Johnson's voice cut through the radio static with alarm. Sarah looked back to see Johnson's aircraft trailing smoke and flame from its left engine. The young pilot was struggling to maintain control as his damaged F-22 began losing altitude. Enemy missiles had found their target despite the aircraft's advanced defensive systems. "Johnson, get out of there! Head back to base," Sarah ordered, but she knew it might already be too late. The lieutenant's aircraft was severely damaged and losing power rapidly. She watched helplessly as her wingman fought to keep his burning jet in the air, long enough to reach safety. The aerial battle was becoming more intense by the minute. Enemy aircraft were attacking from multiple directions, their pilots showing impressive skill and coordination, despite losing their command group. Sarah realized these were not ordinary pilots, but an elite squadron trained specifically for this type of mission. They knew exactly what they were doing and were willing to sacrifice themselves to achieve their objectives. Raptor 1, I'm down to 4 missiles, Major Thompson reported. Sarah checked her own weapon status and saw she had 6 missiles remaining. Between them, they had destroyed 8 enemy aircraft, but more than 30 hostile jets were still active. Some were continuing toward the base while others were engaged in the aerial battle with the two remaining F-22s. Sarah's tactical display showed enemy aircraft were now only 5 minutes away from reaching the base. Once they got within range, their missiles could devastate the installation and surrounding communities. She had to find a way to stop more of them, even though the odds seemed impossible. The situation was becoming desperate. Lieutenant Johnson's damaged aircraft was limping back toward base, trailing smoke and losing altitude. Major Thompson was engaged with multiple enemy fighters and running low on ammunition. Sarah herself was outnumbered 10-1 and facing some of the most skilled enemy pilots she had ever encountered. But giving up was not an option. Too many lives depended on her ability to hold the line against the overwhelming attack. Sarah selected her next targets and prepared to continue the fight, knowing that every enemy aircraft she destroyed might save hundreds of innocent people on the ground below. Sarah's F-22 dove toward the enemy aircraft at nearly the speed of sound, her aircraft becoming a blur against the mountain backdrop. Her plan was extremely dangerous and had never been attempted in real combat, but desperate times called for desperate measures. She was going to use her aircraft as a weapon itself, disrupting enemy attack runs through sheer aggression and superior flying skills. The first enemy aircraft she targeted was lining up for a missile attack on the base's control tower. Sarah screamed down from above at an impossible angle, her jet's engines creating sonic booms that echoed through the valleys. The enemy pilot, startled by her sudden appearance, broke off his attack run and dove toward the mountains to escape. His missiles went wide, exploding harmlessly in empty fields. "What the hell is Raptor 1 doing?" Major Thompson's voice came through the radio as he watched Sarah's unorthodox tactics. She was flying closer to enemy aircraft than any safety manual would recommend, using her F-22's speed and agility to force enemy pilots into defensive maneuvers. Every time an enemy jet lined up for an attack, Sarah appeared out of nowhere to disrupt their aim. Her fuel gauge was flashing red warnings, but Sarah ignored them. She had maybe 10 minutes of flying time left before she would be forced to land, but those 10 minutes might be enough to save thousands of lives. She rolled her F-22 inverted and pulled through a crushing dive toward another enemy aircraft that was approaching the base's fuel storage area. The enemy pilot saw her coming and tried to evade, but Sarah had anticipated his movement. She fired her last 2 missiles at close range, both weapons tracking perfectly toward their target. The enemy aircraft exploded in a massive fireball that lit up the morning sky, its debris raining down on the empty wilderness far from any civilian areas. "Splash one," Sarah called out, but immediately had to throw her aircraft into violent evasive maneuvers as 3 enemy fighters converged on her position. She was now completely out of missiles and running on fumes, but she continued to harass the enemy formation with pure flying skill and determination. Major Thompson, inspired by Sarah's example, began using similar tactics with his damaged F-22. Despite battle damage to his aircraft, he used his remaining missiles and superior maneuverability to break up enemy attack formations. Between the 2 American pilots, they were creating chaos in the enemy ranks and preventing coordinated attacks on the base. The enemy pilots were becoming frustrated and confused by the aggressive American tactics. Instead of the easy target they had expected, they found themselves in a desperate dogfight with 2 of the most skilled pilots they had ever faced. Several enemy aircraft collided with each other while trying to evade Sarah's attacks, reducing their numbers without her having to fire a shot. "Raptor 1, you need to return to base immediately." General Hayes's voice crackled through her radio. "Your fuel levels are critical." Sarah could see the base's runway in the distance, but enemy aircraft were still threatening civilian areas. She couldn't abandon the fight now, even if it meant running out of fuel and crashing in the mountains. A new group of enemy aircraft had circled around the battle and were approaching the nearby town of Palmer, home to over 6,000 people. Sarah could see the enemy jets lining up their attack runs on the civilian targets below. Schools, hospitals, and residential neighborhoods were about to be devastated by enemy missiles if she didn't act immediately. Sarah pushed her throttles to the stops and raced toward the enemy aircraft threatening Palmer. Her fuel warning lights were now solid red, and her engines were beginning to show signs of fuel starvation. She had perhaps 2 minutes of flying time left, but the enemy aircraft were only 30 seconds away from launching their attack on the defenseless town. "Not on my watch," Sarah whispered to herself as she lined up behind the enemy formation. Without missiles or cannon ammunition, She would have to use her aircraft itself as a weapon. It was a tactic that meant almost certain death, but it might be the only way to save the innocent people below. The enemy aircraft began their attack. Dive toward Palmer. Their pilots focused on the targets below and unaware of Sarah's approach from behind. She closed the distance rapidly, her F-22's superior speed allowing her to catch up with the enemy formation. The town spread out below them, its residents going about their morning routines completely unaware of the danger approaching from above. Sarah could see children playing in school playgrounds, parents driving to work, and elderly couples walking their dogs along peaceful streets. All of those innocent lives were about to be snuffed out unless she could stop the enemy attack in the next few seconds. Her aircraft was nearly out of fuel. Her weapons were exhausted, but her determination was stronger than ever. She selected the lead enemy aircraft and prepared to ram her F-22 into its tail section, a collision that would destroy both aircraft, but might disrupt the entire enemy formation. It was a suicide mission, but Sarah had accepted that possibility when she first took off to defend her base. Sometimes the ultimate sacrifice was the only option left. Major Thompson's voice cut through the radio static with urgency. "Sarah, don't do it. There has to be another way." But Sarah had already committed to her course of action. Her F-22 closed the final distance to the enemy formation as she prepared to give her life to save the people of Palmer, Alaska. Sarah's F-22 dove toward the enemy aircraft at nearly the speed of sound, her aircraft becoming a blur against the mountain backdrop. Her plan was extremely dangerous and had never been attempted in real combat, but desperate times called for desperate measures. She was going to use her aircraft as a weapon itself, disrupting enemy attack runs through sheer aggression and superior flying skills. The first enemy aircraft she targeted was lining up for a missile attack on the base's control tower. "Sarah!" screamed down from above at an impossible angle, her jet's engines creating sonic booms that echoed through the valleys. The enemy pilot, startled by her sudden appearance, broke off his attack run and dove toward the mountains to escape. His missiles went wide, exploding harmlessly in empty fields. "What the hell is Raptor 1 doing?" Major Thompson's voice came through the radio as he watched Sarah's unorthodox tactics. She was flying closer to enemy aircraft than any safety manual would recommend, using her F-22's speed and agility to force enemy pilots into defensive maneuvers. Every time an enemy jet lined up for an attack, Sarah appeared out of nowhere to disrupt their aim. Her fuel gauge was flashing red warnings, but Sarah ignored them. She had maybe 10 minutes of flying time left before she would be forced to land, but those 10 minutes might be enough to save thousands of lives. She rolled her F-22 inverted and pulled through a crushing dive toward another enemy aircraft that was approaching the base's fuel storage area. The enemy pilot saw her coming and tried to evade, but Sarah had anticipated his movement. She fired her last 2 missiles at close range, both weapons tracking perfectly toward their target. The enemy aircraft exploded in a massive fireball that lit up the morning sky, its debris raining down on the empty wilderness far from any civilian areas. "Splash 1, Sarah called out, but immediately had to throw her aircraft into violent evasive maneuvers as 3 enemy fighters converged on her position. She was now completely out of missiles and running on fumes, but she continued to harass the enemy formation with pure flying skill and determination. Major Thompson, inspired by Sarah's example, began using similar tactics with his damaged F-22. Despite battle damage to his aircraft, he used his remaining missiles and superior maneuverability to break up enemy attack formations. Between the 2 American pilots, they were creating chaos in the enemy ranks and preventing coordinated attacks on the base. The enemy pilots were becoming frustrated and confused by the aggressive American tactics. Instead of the easy target they had expected, they found themselves in a desperate dogfight with 2 of the most skilled pilots they had ever faced. Several enemy aircraft collided with each other while trying to evade Sarah's attacks, reducing their numbers without her having to fire a shot. "Raptor 1, you need to return to base immediately." General Hayes's voice crackled through her radio. "Your fuel levels are critical." Sarah could see the base's runway in the distance, but enemy aircraft were still threatening civilian areas. She couldn't abandon the fight now, even if it meant running out of fuel and crashing in the mountains. A new group of enemy aircraft had circled around the battle and were approaching the nearby town of Palmer, home to over 6,000 people. "Sarah, could see the enemy jets lining up their attack runs on the civilian targets below. Schools, hospitals, and residential neighborhoods were about to be devastated by enemy missiles if she didn't act immediately. Sarah pushed her throttles to the stops and raced toward the enemy aircraft threatening Palmer. Her fuel warning lights were now solid red, and her engines were beginning to show signs of fuel starvation. She had perhaps 2 minutes of flying time left, but the enemy aircraft were only 30 seconds away from launching their attack on the defenseless town. "Not on my watch," Sarah whispered to herself as she lined up behind the enemy formation. Without missiles or cannon ammunition, she would have to use her aircraft itself as a weapon. It was a tactic that meant almost certain death, but it might be the only way to save the innocent people below. The enemy aircraft began their attack. Dive toward Palmer. Their pilots focused on the targets below and unaware of Sarah's approach from behind. She closed the distance rapidly, her F-22's superior speed allowing her to catch up with the enemy formation. The town spread out below them, its residents going about their morning routines completely unaware of the danger approaching from above. Sarah could see children playing in school playgrounds, parents driving to work, and elderly couples walking their dogs along peaceful streets. All of those innocent lives were about to be snuffed out unless she could stop the enemy attack in the next few seconds. Her aircraft was nearly out of fuel. Her weapons were exhausted, but her determination was stronger than ever. She selected the lead enemy aircraft and prepared to ram her F-22 into its tail section, a collision that would destroy both aircraft, but might disrupt the entire enemy formation. It was a suicide mission, but Sarah had accepted that possibility when she first took off to defend her base. Sometimes the ultimate sacrifice was the only option left. Major Thompson's voice cut through the radio static with urgency. "Sarah, don't do it. There has to be another way." But Sarah had already committed to her course of action. Her F-22 closed the final distance to the enemy formation as she prepared to give her life to save the people of Palmer, Alaska. Just as Sarah was about to ram the lead enemy aircraft, a new voice crackled over the radio that changed everything. "This is Eagle Squadron. We have visual on the battle. American fighters, break away immediately." Sarah looked up to see 12 fresh F-22 Raptors diving down from high altitude, their missiles already locked onto the enemy formation threatening Palmer. The reinforcements had arrived just in time. Eagle Squadron had been conducting training exercises over the Pacific when they received the emergency call. They had flown at maximum speed to reach the battle, arriving at the critical moment when Sarah was about to sacrifice herself to save the town below. "Raptor 1, this is Eagle Lead," came the voice of Colonel Martinez, Sarah's former training instructor. "We'll take it from here. Get that bird on the ground before you run out of fuel completely." Sarah had never been happier to hear another pilot's voice as she pulled her F-22 away from the enemy formation and headed toward the base. The fresh squadron of F-22s tore into the remaining enemy aircraft with devastating effect. Their missiles found target after target as the enemy formation finally began to collapse under the overwhelming firepower. The enemy pilots, who had been fighting for over 20 minutes, were low on fuel and ammunition themselves. Many chose to retreat rather than face the fresh American fighters. Sarah's engines began to sputter as her fuel finally ran out completely. She was still 5 miles from the base runway, but she had enough altitude to glide her F-22 to a dead-stick landing. Her aircraft, designed to be one of the most advanced fighters in the world, was now nothing more than a very expensive glider drifting toward the ground. "Tower, this is Raptor 1 declaring an emergency. I'm out of fuel and making a dead stick. Approach to runway 27, Sarah transmitted calmly despite her desperate situation. The control tower immediately cleared all other aircraft from her path and alerted the crash and rescue teams to stand by for her landing attempt. Major Thompson, his own aircraft damaged but still flyable, formed up alongside Sarah's gliding F-22 to escort her to the runway. "You did good up there, Mitchell," he said over the radio. "I've never seen flying like that in my entire career." Sarah smiled grimly as she concentrated on maintaining her glide slope toward the distant runway. The base's runway stretched ahead of her like a narrow ribbon of concrete. Without engine power, she would have only one chance to get the landing right. Too high and she would overshoot the runway into the forest beyond. Too low and she would crash short of the runway in the rough terrain leading up to the base. She had to hit her target perfectly. Emergency vehicles lined both sides of the runway as Sarah's F-22 approached for landing. Firefighters and rescue crews stood ready to respond if her aircraft crashed during the landing attempt. The entire base held its breath as their hero pilot attempted to bring her powerless jet home safely. Sarah lowered her landing gear and flaps to increase drag and help slow her aircraft's approach speed. The F-22 was designed to land with engine power available, so a dead-stick landing was extremely challenging even for an experienced pilot. She had practiced similar landings in flight simulators, but this was her first time attempting it in a real aircraft. The runway threshold passed beneath her aircraft at exactly the right altitude and speed. Sarah flared her F-22 gently and felt the main landing gear touch down with a solid thump on the concrete runway. She deployed her drag chute and applied the brakes carefully to bring the aircraft to a stop without engine reverse thrust to help slow her down. "Raptor 1 is down safely," the tower controller announced with obvious relief in his voice. Sarah's F-22 rolled to a stop halfway down the runway, her successful landing bringing an end to one of the most dramatic aerial battles in military history. Ground crews and emergency vehicles raced toward her aircraft as she shut down her systems. Meanwhile, Eagle Squadron was finishing off the remaining enemy aircraft with methodical precision. The enemy formation that had once numbered 40 aircraft was now reduced to less than 10 survivors, most of whom were retreating toward the ocean at maximum speed. The threat to the base and surrounding communities had been eliminated. Sarah climbed out of her cockpit on shaky legs, the adrenaline from the long battle finally catching up with her. General Hayes was the first person to reach her aircraft, his weathered face showing a mixture of relief and pride. "Captain Mitchell, that was the finest display of flying and courage I've seen in 30 years of military service," he said as he helped her down from her aircraft. The base erupted in cheers as word spread that the attack had been defeated. Sarah had become a hero, but she knew the victory had come at a cost. Lieutenant Johnson was in the hospital with injuries from his ejection, and several base personnel had been wounded during the attack. The enemy had been stopped, but the price of freedom was always high. As Sarah looked up at the sky where the battle had raged, she could see the contrails of Eagle Squadron's F-22s as they continued to pursue the retreating enemy aircraft. The immediate threat was over, but she knew this attack was probably just the beginning of a larger conflict that would test America's resolve and military strength in the days to come. 3 weeks after the battle, Captain Sarah Mitchell stood at attention in the Pentagon's main auditorium as the Secretary of Defense prepared to present her with the Distinguished Flying Cross, one of the military's highest honors for heroism in aerial combat. The auditorium was packed with military leaders, government officials, and media representatives from around the world who had come to witness the ceremony. The battle over Alaska had made international headlines and turned Sarah into a global symbol of courage and determination. News outlets had dubbed her the Guardian Angel of Alaska for her role in saving thousands of civilian lives. But Sarah remained humble about her actions, always quick to point out that she had been part of a team effort that included Major Thompson, Lieutenant Johnson, and the pilots of Eagle Squadron. Lieutenant Johnson had recovered from his injuries and was present at the ceremony, walking with a slight limp from his hard parachute landing in the mountains. He had been rescued by search teams within hours of ejecting from his damaged F-22, but not before spending a cold night in the Alaskan wilderness. The young pilot had also been awarded a medal for his courage under fire. Major Thompson had received the Silver Star for his actions during the battle. Despite flying a damaged aircraft, he had continued to engage enemy forces and played a crucial role in disrupting their attack formations. The experienced pilot had announced his intention to remain in the Air Force for several more years, inspired by the events of that morning to continue serving his country. The investigation into how enemy aircraft had penetrated so deeply into American airspace was ongoing, but preliminary reports suggested a sophisticated operation involving multiple aircraft carriers and advanced stealth technology. The enemy had clearly been planning the attack for months or years, studying American defensive patterns and exploiting weaknesses in radar coverage. Eagle Squadron had been credited with destroying the remaining enemy aircraft, shooting down 8 more hostile jets before the survivors retreated beyond American territorial waters. Colonel Martinez had recommended all of his pilots for commendations, but he reserved special praise for Sarah's actions in holding off the initial attack. Against overwhelming odds, the town of Palmer had held its own ceremony honoring Sarah and the other pilots who had saved their community. A statue was being planned for the town center, depicting an F-22 Raptor climbing toward the sky in defense of the peaceful community below. The mayor had declared the anniversary of the battle as Defenders Day to honor all military personnel who protect civilian populations. Sarah's parents had flown in from Iowa to attend the Pentagon ceremony. Her father, still working as an aircraft mechanic, was amazed to see his daughter receiving such high honors from the nation's top military leaders. Her mother had tears in her eyes as she watched her daughter being recognized for her extraordinary courage and skill. The F-22 that Sarah had flown during the battle was being repaired and would return to service within a month. The aircraft had suffered minor damage from the extreme maneuvers during combat, but the airframe remained structurally sound. Sarah had requested to continue flying the same aircraft, feeling a special bond with the machine that had carried her through the most intense battle of her career. The ceremony concluded with Sarah receiving her medal from the Secretary of Defense himself. As the medal was pinned to her uniform, she thought about all the people who had made her success possible. Her parents who had encouraged her dreams, her instructors who had taught her to fly, her fellow pilots who had fought beside her, and the ground crews who had prepared her aircraft for battle. But Sarah also knew that the real heroes were the people she had protected that day. The families in Palmer who continued their peaceful lives because she and her fellow pilots had stood between them and danger. The children who could still play in their school playgrounds because enemy missiles had been prevented from reaching their targets. The elderly couples who could still take their morning walks because freedom had been defended by those willing to sacrifice everything to preserve it. In the weeks following the ceremony, Sarah was assigned to a new position at the Pentagon, helping to develop improved defensive strategies based on lessons learned from the Alaska battle. Her insights into aerial combat and enemy tactics were considered invaluable for preparing America's defenses against future attacks. But she made it clear that she wanted to return to flying as soon as possible. The enemy attack had failed, but intelligence reports suggested that more attacks were being planned by hostile nations seeking to test American resolve. Sarah and her fellow pilots would be ready for them. The events over Alaska had proven that superior training, advanced technology, and unwavering courage could overcome even overwhelming odds when combined with the determination to protect innocent lives. As Sarah looked out the window of her Pentagon office at the busy streets of Washington, D.C., she reflected on how one morning had changed her life forever. She had always known that being a military pilot meant accepting the possibility of making the ultimate sacrifice for her country. But she had never imagined that her actions would inspire so many people and demonstrate to the world that freedom is always worth defending. The battle was over, but the mission continued. Sarah Mitchell, the farm girl from Iowa who had dreamed of flying, had become a symbol of American determination and courage. Her story would be told for generations, as an example of how one person's refusal to give up in the face of impossible odds could change the course of history and save thousands of innocent lives. The sky above America remained free because people like Sarah Mitchell were willing to defend it no matter the cost. And as long as such heroes existed, the nation would never fall to those who sought to destroy the liberty and peace that millions of Americans cherished every day.